Today we're talking about a recent project that Nahal and I are doing on to look at the constructs of academic English in the digital age. I will start the presentation and then Nahal will do the second half. So just briefly some background why we're interested in this project. So as you all know that most language tests, they test language testers' ability usually in 4 separate skills in terms of reading, writing, listening and speaking. Even though we have seen an increasing use of integrated assessment in recent years, when we compare to what is actually happening in higher education, we can still feel that there seems to be a difference, right? And with all these digital educational technologies that are available to us now, and especially in the past 2 years that because of the pandemic, everything is moving online, just like our seminar used to be face-to-face, and now we're doing all this virtually. So we're interested in how all these changes would have impacted on the way that we communicate. For example, now I'm talking to you, but I can't see your faces, but I can see your name and surnames. And maybe later on, I would look at the questions by reading the text. So all these, how these changes are shaping the way we communicate in academia. So that's the background of the research, the project. And we're going to talk about phase 1 of the project, which is mainly about a scoping review, finding out the constructs, the new constructs of academic English. And this project is funded by Cambridge Assessment English, and this is actually a collaborative project. So we have regular input from colleagues from Cambridge Assessment, including Evelina, Tony Clark, and Carla, and also Jamie Dunley from the British Council giving us advice from time to time. So the aims of the project, mainly, as I said, is about helping us to conceptualize or reconceptualize academic English in the digital age. We want to see how big the gap is between the current assessment practices and all these new constructs, and so that can help us to give better recommendations to move towards to maybe different formats of assessments. And in terms of methodology, so there's mainly a scoping review. The scoping review, the purpose of this is because we didn't have the time scale of this project was quite short. We have about 3 months. So the idea is to really quite efficiently to map out relevant research in a interested area of topic, in our case like technologies used in higher education and how that has impacted language use in academia. So what we did was we pre-selected some journal articles that we thought might be most relevant. We selected 12, which includes all the language testing journals and some of the journals that are more on the technology side, for example, education and technology systems, computers and educations. And then we did a search through identifying different keywords like academic, higher education, edtech, automatic, remote, virtual, that sort of keywords. And we actually started the previous search with 10 years back, and then very quickly we realized that some of the earlier study were not relevant anymore. So in the end, we decided to focus on the previous 5 years. So in the end, we had 125 articles. And after identifying the articles, we did some coding to look at the different themes. And today we are going to present the findings on mainly the constructs of academic English in the digital age. We also look at some key websites, for example, Advanced HE UKRI gov.uk, just to look at what the officials say about technologies used in higher educations and some policy documents. At the same time, we also looked at for systematic reviews of research on IELTS conducted by CRELLA colleagues, just to understand like the landscape of research on language testing in the previous years. The scoping review was the majority part of the study, but at the same time, we thought it might be good to talk to some stakeholders. So we had a chance to interview 3 participants, and we understand that 3 is by no means representative. But we still hope that the participants we interviewed would have sort of like institutional-wide practice, like they have an overview of that. It's not like just an individual student. So we selected a program leader, a colleague for BA and MA ELT programs, and also an undergrad student representative as well as a postgrad student representative. So we want to, through talking to them, understand more about their experience and also the people they represent, their experiences of technology in higher education. So in terms of findings for the scoping review, I'm going to first of all highlight some trends that we found. The first one, really overwhelmingly, there's a paradigm shift from independent language use to multimodal use of language. And one author even put it like this: communication in higher education is now fundamentally multimodal, which means the things that we do no longer involve one language skill, speaking, listening, reading or writing. Is actually a combination of 2 or 3 or even 4 of these in a digital environment. And there have been a blooming of different online digital platform resources or tools that are available now to students and teachers. And as a result, there is a pressing need to develop digital multimodal academic skills. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more what these skills might involve. And there's also increasing discussion about like different new genres that are appearing in the academic discourse. So in terms of assessment or assignments, homework that students need to do in universities, what people have found discussed in the literature is that paper texts, for example, journal articles, chapters, books, they're no longer the primary channel of teaching and learning. Instead, meaning is now communicated through multimodal text. For example, articles with multimedia hyperlinks. You can click, for example, when the previous speakers, they answer a question, they put something in the chat with a link that you can click on it. And then posters have changed quite a lot. And in the old days when I was doing PhD, do you still remember, you used to design a poster and then print it out, going to the print shop and then putting the like A2 size poster into a poster tube and then bringing it onto the tube and then train going to the conference center. No, they don't have to do this anymore. But instead, they have to do is to design e-posters with interactive illustrations. So I sort of feel lucky that I'm not doing PhD in this age. So, and then in terms of assignments, even though like essay writing is still dominant, there are more and more demands for students to integrate different discourse, written or spoken discourse with embedded graphics, video animation, etc., different kinds of visual aids in order to communicate their message. So there's a lot of discussion about digital multimodal literacy in the literature. So people are discussing, okay, with all these changes, really students are expected to develop like a active interaction with different resources. For example, students need to be able to navigate, select, interpret, and deploy different digital texts. And with all this massive information that that is available to them, they need to be able to develop concept mapping skills to sort of develop their own hierarchy of conceptualizing all this information. And also there's a new term called multimodal composing. Students need to be able to compose with different modes, with different platform and resources. And all these are, you can argue they are not entirely new, but it's sort of like a extra dimension of what we are used to in academia. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with these platforms, resources now after 2 years into the pandemic. So because of all these platforms now allows people to interact simultaneously, and they can interact. So that really shape or change the way people communicate or do work in universities. And there's like discussion in literature about collaboration, and also we really like this term collective intelligence. So I guess group work or project or writing, these are not new in university studies. However, because of all these platforms like Teams or Google Document that allow students to actually write at the same time simultaneously, and also give each other feedback, and also when they read an article, they can contribute to the understanding, the representation of the articles at the same time together collectively. So people have described that actually all this provide environment for students to be socialized into their disciplinary cultures that was not so obvious to people in the past without all this technology advance. And now I'm going to hand over to Nahal, and she's going to talk about the new genres that we have discovered.
Thank you, Sathena. Yes, thank you. So our findings show that digital communications has actually changed traditional notions and uses of written and spoken language. And our review pointed to the emergence of, let's say, new hybrid genres in higher education. In an analysis of a corpus of tweets from 2 academic conferences, Luzon and Alvaro Prosac, for example, demonstrated how scholars use various linguistic and non-linguistic expressions of stance and engagement when tweeting, and called for a reconceptualization of what it means to write or produce academic texts in the 21st century. For those of you who are active on social media, you will probably have noticed this trend with both students and academics summarizing, critiquing, and engaging with research in the concise, written, but very often conversational format of the tweet. We've also seen the traditional static poster presentations give way to new formats, such as speed presentations and video posters, that not only blur the lines between informal speech and formal writing, but also incorporate elements of multimedia to more effectively communicate meaning. Relatedly, and for those of you who are familiar with the REF and the importance of demonstrating research impact, there's increasingly a requirement for academics to communicate their research to a wider non-academic audience. And this has somehow eroded the formalities traditionally associated with the academic written genres. So previous distinctions between written and spoken language are perhaps less tenable, with posts in blogs, Twitter, and Instagram often displaying characteristics of spoken language. As McCulloch observes, certain forms of writing have become a vital conversational part of our ordinary lives. And all of these highlight the importance of students and academics alike to develop competencies in these new hybrid genres. And of course, these have implications for assessments to elicit such competencies, and we're going to come back to this a little bit later. So our findings so far have touched on new constructs related to multimodal communication, and these were primarily linked to the digital revolution. What we'd like to add is that our review also pointed to some limitations of current skills-based approaches to EAP assessments, and perhaps the underrepresentation of, let's say, the EAP construct. In the assessment of writing, for example, there has been a call for incorporating integrated tasks that involve summarizing and synthesizing of information from multiple sources on a given topic to improve, let's say, their cognitive validity and authenticity. In listening, John Field identifies several high-level functions that are integral to academic listening, but in his words, curiously underrepresented in academic listening tests, such as, for example, the ability for listeners to follow and link different lines of argument. A review of academic reading tests suggests an absence of items targeting intertextual reading skills, and with heavier reliance on items testing at the lower levels of reading. In speaking assessment, the ability to produce nuanced yet argumentative persuasive discourse, taking a stance, defending or supporting one's position in an argument may not always be elicited. To address these limitations, there's a need to broaden the EAP construct with a shift towards assessment of integrated skills. As Jim Purpura argues, integrated tasks are considered to better reflect real-life communicative acts and tap into higher-level processes, especially in the educational target language use domains. And this is perhaps particularly the case in a technology-driven era where boundaries between visual and text-based input and different modes of delivery are becoming less distinct. There are, of course, existing integrated tasks, but these are often linear in format, limited to two modes, such as listening into speaking or reading into writing. Integrated tasks therefore need to be revisited in order to better represent the dynamic and multimodal nature of language use in academic settings in the digital age. I'll now move on to briefly touch on the results of some of our interviews. As Sathena said, we only had 3 participants, but we still think their views were quite interesting in shedding light on some of the issues to do with technology in higher education. So we asked our respondents about using technology at their institutions, and while a range of different technologies and platforms are used across institutions, there were large variations reported in the uses of technology. To illustrate, at one institute, technology was regarded as someone just standing at front of a class looking at a screen, whereas in another institution, technology was used as a way of moving away from lecture-style learning with a focus on active learning in digitally rich environments. This involved integrating a blend of live sessions with lecturers, offline activities with students, and small group activities. The respondents' attitudes towards the use of technologies were also mixed. The program leader, for example, viewed technology quite positively, not only for the delivery of large-scale seminars, but also in allowing live interactivity. The postgraduate student representative explicitly commented on an institutional policy that intended for the substance of interaction to stay the same despite the loss of physical proximity. This view was not shared by the undergraduate student representative at a different institution, who found that technology had led to a decrease in human-to-human interaction simply using emails without the human contact side. When asking about the different skills that respondents considered as essential for operating in higher education, one of the strongest themes that emerged was navigating digital resources. Students in higher education settings are expected to cope with large amounts of reading, to use a variety of online tools, identify authoritative references, reputable ones, and draw on and critically engage with a wide array of multimodal resources in order to successfully complete their studies and research. Developing such skills, however, is not without its challenges. So our postgraduate student representative, for example, commented on how digitalization has both made research easier but increased the burden on it. As more resources are easily available, students feel more pressure to demonstrate wider reading. Being able to tell good references from bad ones, when you've got Wikipedia and blogs, or developing your own unique voice when there are hundreds and hundreds of resources to look at, were identified as really important and difficult challenges. When asked about any issues or concerns about the use of technology in higher education, our respondents raised several important points. Access, for example, was raised as an issue, where some individuals may not have the right equipment due to financial reasons and socioeconomic factors. Digital literacy was another concern, with mature students, for example, not necessarily having all the right skills. Lack of support, training, or guidance in the face of ever-changing digital tools was another concern. In the words of one of our respondents, the assumption that everyone has the same technological standard puts people at a disadvantage. And talking specifically about COVID-19, our respondents reported challenges in engaging with their work and studies as well as with other students. The undergraduate representative mentioned feeling more detached and less engaged in work. The same sentiment was reported by the program leader. It's really hard to engage with students. All expressed a preference for face-to-face interaction. Although our worlds are surrounded by technology, the human contact and interaction is still important and cannot be replicated online. Just to briefly recap, our findings from the 2 sources pointed to the following trends. A shift towards online interactive multimodal communication, a surge in the use of online digital multimedia sources, tools, and platforms, a trend towards integrated skills assessment and some of the limitations of current EAP assessments, the need to develop digital academic skills, and also variations in the uses of technology across institutions, with what we see in practice not necessarily matching what is reported in research studies. Taken together, these findings have important implications for EAP assessment tasks. So if the purpose of EAP assessment is to measure whether candidates have the language ability to operate in academic settings, then there's a need for EAP assessment tasks to be reconceptualized with more multimodal, integrated, nonlinear tasks that require test takers to exhibit multimodal literacy, engage critically with a variety of multimodal resources and genres to communicate meaning and produce outputs. So going forward, we think that now that the dust has settled a little bit on the pandemic, this is perhaps quite an opportune time to conduct more research, particularly conduct large-scale surveys to examine current as well as best practices, to look at the use and misuses of digital tools, and to gather the views and perspectives of a wide range of stakeholders. We also need to establish the kind of cognitive processes that individuals engage with in their academic pursuits, and to develop new multimodal interactive tasks that reflect what takes place in the target language use domain. To consider appropriate scoring system for evaluating these new task types, and to develop an overarching framework for operationalizing new constructs. We're very happy to report that we have already started work on phase 2 of this project in developing new nonlinear integrated multimodal tasks. And we really hope that we'll be able to report on the research findings very soon. So watch the space, and thank you all very much for listening.